All right, so today we will go ahead and get started on our seventh current health issue, looking at whether or not we should place restrictions on sugar and sugar sweetened beverages. So, before we get started, as always, we'll go through an overview of the current issue. We'll then look at the pro side of the argument as far as why we should have restrictions on sugar and sugar sweetened beverages, and then the cons on why we should place restrictions on these consumables. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first up, we will look at why this is even a topic of debate. Why should we even think about placing restrictions on sugar in the first place? And so the primary reason is because of the overconsumption here in the US, right? So on average, each person in the US is going to consume about 136 pounds of added sugars and sweeteners per year. And that comes out to nearly a third of a pound of sugar that's you are consuming every single day. And so we see about 65 pounds of that is going to come from refined sugar. So think of your normal table sugar. And then 68 pounds roughly will come from corn derived sweeteners, primarily high fructose corn syrup, which is going to be the main sweetener in things like sodas and processed foods. Uh, Take maple syrup, for example. The majority of maple syrup that is sold at your regular normal supermarket is going to be actually high fructose corn syrup, or primarily high fructose corn syrup. So when we look at the issue isn't just about people adding too much sugar into their coffee and maybe having all these gourmet coffee drinks, which I'm just saying if you have the energy to add anything to your coffee other than more coffee, you probably have enough energy. You don't need the caffeine boost in the first place. Just saying. But what we see is that there's actually a lot of this added sugar that's hidden in foods that don't even taste like dessert uh, or even taste sweet. Uh, so, for instance, your hamburger hot dog buns, your granola bars are all going to be sources of added sugars. So when we look at the top five sources of added sugars in the US diet, we see number one going to be your sugar sweetened sodas. So this is still the largest category on where Americans get their added sugars from. So think your Coca Cola, your Pepsi, uh, the number one source of added sugars in the US. Next up, we have grain based desserts. So things like cookies, pastries, cakes be a good example. Then we have snack foods. So, again, a lot of your granola bars, protein bars, even your dried fruit snacks in America, a lot of them are going to be coated with some added sugar as well to make them a little more sweet, a little more desirable so that you keep coming back and you feel like you're being healthy because it's dried fruit. It's got to be healthy, right? We also have fruit drinks, which are often marketed as healthy or natural, right? You see the made with 100% juice, and then you read the actual ingredients, and juice is the very last ingredient on that ingredient list. And number one and two is sugar, and then uh, added water. And so you're actually consuming very little of the actual fruit juice. Then you have your dairy based desserts like ice cream and flavored yogurts, frozen yogurts. Frozen yogurt could be a slightly healthy alternative to ice cream, but it's still not healthy, right? It's still going to have a significant amount of added sugars as well. So, added sugars are going to be scattered across pretty much all foods in America, anything that's convenient, cheap, and heavily marketed, right? It's crazy. We don't ever see a bunch of commercials for uh, bell peppers, but we see tons of commercials for fast food, for candy, gum, but no just fresh produce or meat for the most part. I guess you do have avocados from Mexico, but that would be probably the main exception uh, as far as what healthy foods are advertised. But many of these foods are going to be regularly occurring in the everyday diet in the US. So they're not just uh, regular or occasional treats that you use to maybe reward yourself or something to that extent. So, again, with how busy life can get in the US, we see a lot of times individuals just want whatever's convenient and cheap, especially as inflation increases. Now, there are plenty of health concerns that are related to added sugars. The two we often hear linked to excessive sugar intake would be obesity and type 2 diabetes. And the research here is interesting because there's some conflicting uh, findings. So, some studies suggest that refined sugar directly contributes to diabetes risk, while others argue that it's not necessarily sugar alone, but just the total excess in caloric intake that leads to weight gain, and that weight gain then leads to diabetes. But what both sides can agree on will be that overconsumption of sugar increases metabolic risk, and they do so through promoting fat gain, through insulin resistance, as well as appetite dysregulation. So, even if sugar isn't the only culprit, it does play a clear role in patterns that end up increasing uh, the risk of disease. So, we have seen some governments try to implement policies that would reduce the amount of added sugars the typical American would consume uh, throughout the year. So, a big one that made headlines a while back now, it doesn't feel that long ago, but was the New York City ban of being able to sell, excuse me, sugary beverages that are over 16 ounces. So they were trying to restrict restaurants, movie theaters, food carts from selling any sort of sugary beverage. So your sodas, your like brisk tea, uh, what are some other examples? Powerade, I believe, was even thrown in there, and Gatorade, anything with a significant source of added sugars, where nothing could be greater than 16 ounces. They didn't say you couldn't drink more than 16 ounces. You just would have to buy multiple drinks as opposed to getting one of those big Circle K 64-ounce mega gulp drinks. However, in 2013, state judge, ended up blocking the policy, and primarily because they considered it arbitrary, because the policy didn't actually apply to grocery stores or convenience stores. And so, what was the point of just banning it at a restaurant or movie theater whenever individuals can still purchase all of the added sugars they want in whatever large amount at the local grocery store, 7-Eleven down the street. And in 2014, it was officially struck down by the New York State Appeals Court. Now, there are scenarios or cases out there where this has or these policies have been successful. So, for instance, the Philly beverage tax is one that was passed a while back, and the tax applies to distributors of these sweetened beverages, including both diet and regular sodas. And they applied a rate of 1.5 cents per ounce. And any revenue that was generated from the tax was intended to fund programs like children's activities and recreation center upgrades. So the tax covered a wide range of drinks: regular soda, diet soda, sports drinks, sweetened water, energy drinks, sweetened tea, coffee with a lot of added sugars. All were taxed at a rate of 1.5 cents per ounce. And the tax was levied on the distributor, who is responsible for paying that to the city, not the consumer. But, I mean, the argument would be that the distributor would just increase the cost by 2 cents per ounce and then actually make a profit and pass off that tax to the consumer. But again, the tax was levied on the distributor, not the actual consumer, like in a sales tax. And the benefits of all that added revenue was that they were able to fund public services like children's programs, free preschool, and upgrade the rec centers as well as the parks. Or at least that was the plan on what they would use the funds for. Now, we found that the tax ended up reducing purchases in Philadelphia stores, and that Philadelphia residents actually just increased purchases of tax beverages outside of the city. But we did see that the tax reduced the frequency of adult soda consumption by 31%, which is a significant margin, but it didn't have any detectable impact on any sort of other adult beverage. Now, the tax had no detectable impact on children's consumption of soda overall, but we did see children who were frequent consumers of soda or sweetened beverages prior to the tax ended up reducing the consumption after the tax. So overall, the tax didn't really affect the consumption by the kids, but kids who were over consuming the most did see a reduction. Now, you also saw a similar setup or similar policy in Berkeley, California, where they levied a 1 cent per ounce tax on the distributor, set up very similar to the Philly beverage tax when you're talking about what the funds were used for, who the tax was applied to. Mexico is a good example of applying a similar policy at the federal level or national level. So originally in 2014, Mexico levied a 1 peso per liter tax that has continued to increase throughout the years. And the new proposed tax will be about 3 pesos per liter for 2026. And then we also saw that you have an 8% sales tax which is extremely high on non-essential energy dense foods. So, on the one hand, you can see how this would help deter individuals from consuming unhealthy foods like, say, chips, for instance. But you also see how the government could potentially slide in, get their foot in the door, and then continue to price out a lot of consumables. Right. So we went from 1 peso to 3 pesos in about 1 decade for the sales or the beverage tax per liter. The sales tax on non-essential energy dense foods, 8%. How do we determine what's energy dense and what's not? Who's coming up with those guidelines? And overall, I believe since, or at least since 2019, there were 7 cities that raised $133 million annually using some sort of sugar sweetened beverage tax or policy, which comes out to about $20 million on average per city, which sounds great, and you could fund, your free preschool, your rec centers, all of this with that money. At the same time, though, we look at the size of our cities. It's about 300 schools in Philadelphia. So if you gave Philly an extra $20 million, that's actually just $70,000 more that each school would get. That's not even looking at rec centers or what we would give to parks. So actually saying that this money will fund free preschool for the city, or make significant changes to parks across the city might be, what's the word? A little overzealous, right? So it could have a huge impact at a few particular regions of the city, but if you spread out all of that money that you got from the beverage tax and use it for all of these different initiatives, we actually end up with very little money at each particular site to actually make a significant change. And then we also have big soda or big food that you have to consider as well. So the debate's not just on nutrition and what's correct for getting our population's health under control, but it's also political and economical. So what we see is that sugar-heavy companies use marketing strategies very similar to those that have historically been used by your tobacco industry or alcohol industry. So some examples, you have your breakfast cereals that are high in sugar that will be marketed as low fat, which is appealing to health seekers. It could be potentially considered heart healthy because of the significant reduction in fat. Again, misleading to the consumer. You have your fast food mascots and cartoon branding, all targeted towards children. So, your McDonald's clown, your Wendy's image, Tony the Tiger, who's awesome, all directed at children and getting them invested in that product for life. You also have school cafeteria contracts. So you have soda companies that are literally inside your schools. Gatorade and Powerade would always throw money around at athletic directors in order to have them promote their product in the school and on the sidelines, and not necessarily the athletic director promoting it, but having all of the equipment, say Gatorade or Powerade, that the company itself will pay for. And we know Gatorade, Powerade are just owned by Pepsi and Coke, respectively. You also have some schools that have fast foods in their high school cafeteria. So you could walk in and have Subway at your local high school cafeteria. We also have the misleading labeling that we like to do with fruit drinks. So made with 100% juice, even though the product's mainly just added sugar with a splash of juice in there. And then we also have to consider the large corporate funding influence on nutrition research, and this can sometimes shape public messaging. So all of this is going to need to be considered whenever we are looking at whether or not we should or should not place restrictions on sugar and sugar sweetened beverages. All right, so first up, we will look at the argument in favor of sugar restrictions. And number one argument that can be made is that sugar is a toxic substance that kills. It functions as a chronic toxin, that contributes to long-term disease and shortens lifespan, much like cigarette smoke has done. And we see the prevalence of diabetes has increased by about 700% since the 1960s. And this rise maps out almost perfectly with the rise of processed foods, added sugars, and refined carbohydrates, all of which we consumed as we tried eating a low-fat diet. Now, some people will often respond to this with, well, sugar didn't cause that, obesity did, and sure, it was obesity, but obesity is not random, right? We see obesity and diabetes emerge in pretty much every population that shifts from a traditional diet to a westernized diet that's going to be high in sugar and refined foods. And obesity leads to type 2 diabetes. Both lead to an increased risk in heart disease, cerebral vascular disease, stroke, cancer, Alzheimer's, basically just about every chronic disease. And so whether sugar is directly the cause or the fuel that drives overeating and metabolic dysfunction, it's still a key part of the chain. And so we were told for the longest time that low-fat diets are heart healthy. And so companies, as a result, ended up removing fat from foods, which ended up making the food taste terrible. And so how do you fix the flavor? You replace that fat with sugar. And so, for example, yogurt went from a naturally higher fat food to a low-fat product with about 20 to 30 grams of added sugar, but it was still able to be labeled heart healthy because it had reduced the fat content. So while heart disease mortality appeared to decline, it didn't necessarily decline because we improved our diet. It declined because we invented and sold billions of dollars worth of statins and blood pressure medications. We perform hundreds of thousands of bypasses or surgeries to insert stents to treat the narrowed or blocked arteries every single year. And so we should be looking at it not in that we prevented heart disease, but that we've managed heart disease through massive medical intervention, not preventing it at all with our diet. Now, this side is going to argue for clearer food labels because current labeling is intentionally confusing, trying to make their product look more healthy than it actually is a lot of times. We also want to ban junk food advertising in public schools, which has already been done for the most part because we recognize that kids are impressionable, but we still have certain ways of getting around that. We still have our Gatorade, Pepsi vending machines, and Gatorade can provide a sweet treat for inactive individuals. We already, another argument that can be made would be that we already ban alcohol and tobacco advertising on children's TVs. For the same reason, we know that kids are impressionable, so we should also want to ban the promotion of any foods that encourage overeating and obesity as well. So the argument then becomes, if we acknowledge children are vulnerable and sugary foods are aggressively targeting children, why would we not regulate those ads as well? Additionally, we see that many processed foods are actually engineered for bliss point sweetness, which is the specific amount of sugar, salt, and fat in a food that makes it maximally desirable, very pleasant, which creates a craving for more, which this bliss point sweetness causes rapid dopamine release and causes the development of habit forming eating behavior. And so, yes, there is an addiction argument here, especially when you have companies trying to engineer their food to become more addicting. And if we accept that there's an addiction argument or element to this argument, we can then see how sugar regulation starts looking less like tyranny and a lot more like public health protection aligned with an already existing precedent. And so when we try to frame the argument clearly, we see the government already influences food behavior. When the USDA sets up federal guidelines, it affects how people view healthy foods, how grants are given out for research, what foods are served at school cafeterias. And so indirectly, it is already controlling a lot of our dietary practice. So since the government is already indirectly shaping the food environment and how we view foods as either healthy or unhealthy, it should go ahead and shape it in ways that improve public health. Right? And so the argument could be made looking at the smoking model. Right? We didn't outright ban cigarettes. You can still go and purchase cigarettes just like you would still be able to go purchase sugar, candy, soda, whatever you wanted. We're just limiting the marketing. We're raising the taxes, and we are changing what was acceptable in public spaces as far as smoking. And I guess with the, for instance, New York policy that failed, trying to limit the amount of soda that you can purchase at once. So again, still changing in public spaces. And as a result, we saw smoking rates dropped dramatically. So we would expect similar results with added sugars, which is huge because of the overconsumption that we see in the United States. And so that leads to the core question, uh, if we used public policy to reduce tobacco related deaths, why would we not use similar tools to reduce sugar related chronic disease? Right? So, Chad pointed it out. You guys used it a lot in your uh, discussion posts. Your public health interventions that rely on individual human behavior change are much less successful than ones that rely less on individual action, right? So what you're doing is kind of taking away or not changing the individual action directly, but instead making interventions that could potentially alter how individuals go about planning their regular food consumption. Right? Because people aren't always necessarily logical. Right? So think about how many trees people would plant if they knew it gave us a better Wi-Fi signal. And if you planted enough trees, you could have free Wi-Fi and free internet. Everyone would be going out today buying trees and planting them all around their yards, which is crazy to think about because we can't get Wi-Fi from trees, but we only need them to, breathe, make houses, stay warm. So, again, just making point that the public health interventions that rely on individual human behavior aren't always going to be the best interventions or the interventions that are going to produce as dramatic of a change. All right, and now we have our opposing argument. So we shouldn't place restrictions on sugar or sugar sweetened beverages. And these individuals, or this side, is going to say that sugar restrictions are unnecessary, ineffective, and an example of government overreach. And so we have all these rules and regulations to protect individuals from themselves. Great example is the gas can, right? We have the 5-gallon gas can with a nozzle. We pour gas into, say, our lawnmower, and then we lift the gas can back up, and you've successfully filled your lawnmower, and you haven't really spilled any gas. Great. Nowadays, we have these safety nozzles where we have a lip on the safety nozzle that has to sync up with the lip of the gas tank so that we can apply pressure to open the safety nozzle and allow gas to flow into the tank. And then when we're done filling, we just alleviate that pressure, and the safety nozzle closes so that no extra gas can spill out, which in theory sounds great until you actually have to do it. Then you have to consider how small each lip is, and it slips, and then you have to angle the gas can, otherwise you can only use about half the gas in the gas can, and it actually has caused more spillage than just your normal regular old school nozzle. But we had to switch to these safety nozzles because of one particular redneck in Tennessee, where he decided to throw gasoline on a live fire. Now, nothing wrong with that. We've all thrown gasoline on a live fire. It's part of human nature. If you haven't, you might be an alien. I'm not sure. I definitely don't trust you. I have my eye on you. But everyone who has used gasoline on a live fire, or put some gas on a dead Christmas tree and then lit it with a Roman candle knows that when the fire is active, you can't just simply hold the gas can over the fire and have a steady stream. If there's a steady stream, the flame's going to travel up that flow of gas into the 5 gallons of gas that you're holding with your hands. Everyone except this redneck in Tennessee apparently knows that, and he decided to just keep draining all the gas from the can on the fire with one steady flow. Once he realized the flame was traveling up the stream, he decided to try to put it out by waving the can really fast, which essentially gave him the power to throw fireballs at his friends, thus burning his friends and eventually himself. And he went ahead and sued the gas manufacturing company, or gas can manufacturing company, and won because they had an unsafe design. So now, because of that one individual, we all have to deal with these safety nozzles, whether we like them or not. And so this side would be arguing what we're just supposed to support restrictions on our own liberties because someone else who knows a particular food is unhealthy continues to overconsume that food. I mean, what happened to give me liberty or give me death? I thought this was America. I thought this was America. So anyway, a foundational pillar that this side's argument would rest on would be personal responsibility. So we know diet is a personal choice, right? You decide what goes in your body, not someone else. And then also exercise and lifestyle influence health more than any single nutrient. And so this side argues that we don't need government protection from sugar. We need better education, and so that we can make educated and informed decisions on what goes in our body. And we need some personal accountability as well. So if individuals are informed and still choose unhealthy habits like buying that 2-liter soda at the grocery store, buying that big bag of Mike and Ike's because it saves me 50 cents, then that's their right. Just like any adult can choose to consume alcohol, cigarettes, or go skydiving, all of which could have severe negative health consequences. Now, we on this side will also point out that there's a lot of overinflated stats and comparisons. So, for instance, we often hear that sugar consumption has skyrocketed worldwide since the 1960s to over 300%, but that number is a little misleading because it doesn't take into account population growth during that time period. So since we're looking worldwide and the difference in the population level, we see sugar intake has actually only increased by 60-ish% whenever we account for population growth, because global population has nearly doubled in that time frame. And what we actually see is that in many Western countries, there has been a leveling off or actually a decline in sugar consumption in recent decades. Now, to be fair, most Western countries, like Japan, the US, most of Western Europe, have seen or experienced a significant decline in birth rates, and thus their population is decreasing. So if we're going to say population growth isn't as bad because sugar consumption is not as bad as we think because population growth has doubled, we also have to factor in that most of these Western countries are seeing a drop off in their population. But the point is that the majority of this increased sugar intake is coming from developing countries who are seeing a significant spike as they shift to a more Western diet from their traditional diets. And then you often hear sugar compared to drugs and alcohol because it's a toxic substance that leads to disease. But let's actually compare sugar to alcohol or drugs. So sugar does not intoxicate like alcohol and drugs. Sugar does not cause secondhand harm. So like cigarettes with secondhand smoke, or say car crashes because of a drunk driver. And then we also see sugar does not cause acute overdose like we can see in alcohol and drugs. And so sugar is not a public safety threat in the same way alcohol or opioids or tobacco are. And then we also have all of our overconsumption studies, which are going to support the fact that there's no clear direct evidence that typical sugar consumption alone is going to cause major chronic diseases outside of maybe some dental issues. Instead, diabetes and obesity are multifactorial. So it's going to depend, the prevalence of these diseases is going to depend on sedentary lifestyle, sleep disturbances, increased stress, and we see total caloric intake is going to matter much more than our specific sugar intake alone. Also, when we look at overconsumption, we see that too much of anything is harmful. If you drink too much water, if you breathe a gas concentration with too much oxygen, it could damage your lungs. If you eat too much protein, it could be harmful to your kidneys. So literally anything. Think about the things that we have to survive: water, oxygen, protein. All can be harmful if you consume too much. And so there's no real study tying any of these diseases to sugar other than the fact that we are consuming too much. And so singling out sugar as the villain is going to oversimplify a very complex metabolic picture. It would be like if we just started saying we should cut out all protein from our diet because protein leads to kidney damage. It's like, yeah, protein leads to kidney damage if you consume way too much of it, but if you're consuming normal amounts of it, it's perfectly fine, healthy, and necessary. And so a good example of regular sugar consumption not leading to potential disease would be the entire country of Australia, its population post 1980. So we've seen obesity rates in Australia have doubled. We've seen diabetes has tripled in this population, whereas sugar consumption has actually dropped by 23% since since 1980. So even though sugar intake has declined, obesity and diabetes have tripled or doubled or tripled. So reducing sugar did not reduce obesity or diabetes, and this would suggest the problem is not one nutrient, but instead overall lifestyle and the environment. Now, another argument that could be made looking more at government overreach would be potentially banning high glycemic foods. So if the government restricts sugar uh, because, say, or because added sugars cause a significant spike in blood sugar, then logically wheat, rice, potatoes, all high glycemic foods would also need to be regulated then, which leads to that slippery slope argument of if we ban soda because sugar is bad, well, isn't sugar sugar? Right? They're all sugar's just, or our typical sugar that we think of, table sugar, is sucrose, which is just a glucose molecule linked with a fructose molecule. That's it. Sugar. So then if we're banning soda, then shouldn't we also potentially ban orange juice? Now, orange juice is thought to be healthy because it provides other nutrients, particularly like vitamin C. But if we consumed a can of Coke and a vitamin C pill, we are basically consuming the same thing as a glass of orange juice. So where do we draw the line at that point? So orange juice, fruit smoothies, honey, bread, ketchup, which has tons of added sugar, granola bars, pretty much any school cafeteria item could be further restricted. And although we would like to say that there should be some common sense involved in drawing the line between soda and, say, orange juice, we see that's rarely the case with public opinion and government policies. So with more information, maybe some spinning of that information and spreading that out to populations, we could have very differing of opinions between individuals on whether or not we should ban juices as well, or why ketchup is fine, or why the granola bar should be banned, but then honey should still be sold without any government restrictions. And what we see is that a lot of individuals who support the soda tax or restrictions are going to continue to advocate even if we find some sort of middle ground. So, for instance, a lot of these supporters also are going to support gentle supply control, where we limit the availability, like who can sell candy, for instance, or we're going to limit the hours of the retailers. So maybe restricting how long a grocery store could be open. If we're going to say they're the only ones that can sell bags of candy and not convenience stores. They also are going to generally support taxing on any processed food with added sugars, which is pretty much everything in the grocery store, and also a complete ban on advertisements altogether, which then brings up the case of if we are banning soda advertisements on every channel, what else can we ban? Is it only government approved advertisements that can be released? And then does that change based off of who is currently in power? Right, so there's a lot of negative side effects or consequences to establishing a complete ban. And then also looking at adding restrictions on who can purchase certain foods like candy or soda, for instance. Maybe you put a age restriction where kids can't just go into the convenience store and purchase a soda with their parents' money. And it sounds a little absurd to some people, but you had a Philadelphia neighborhood where adults, I say parents, but uh, they weren't parents of the kids, so just adults who uh, made sure that kids couldn't walk into a convenience store and purchase, uh, you know, candy or soda that they wanted to buy. So yes, Philly had that Philly beverage tax, but then you had a group of adults taking it a step further and trying to make sure that they blocked any kids from entering convenience stores for snacks because those snacks are unhealthy, or at least the adults deemed them to be unhealthy. And then you just have government competence or potentially lack thereof. We've seen government has always had a blind spot forever. So, for instance, when the low fat diet was being pushed by a few research scientists, we see that most of them were actually funded by big food companies, and a lot of their data was cherry picked, and yet the government went ahead and moved forward with guidelines and being able to consider, you know, yogurt with 30 grams of added sugar heart healthy because it's low fat. The Sugar Association has pushed a calorie as a calorie by taking bad science from nutritionists or registered dietitians who are experts, but maybe aren't experts at conducting experiments. And as a result, you have the Sugar Association who was able to capitalize on a few bad reports. Again, big sugar companies funded some of the best sugar biochemists in the world around the 1960s, and it wasn't necessarily because they had a villainous plan or plot. It was to try to improve their product. But what we see is a lot of people pushing the dietary fat is bad for you notion were funded by big sugar companies for years. So I'm not saying that the influence was there on purpose, but potentially those individuals could feel a certain way to companies who have spent millions of dollars pretty much giving them everything they've wanted out of life. And I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have negative feelings on Pepsi if they started donating $10 million every year to whatever research I wanted to do. And as a result, you probably don't want them to, or you don't want their business to feel any pain or be devastated in any way. And so as a result, maybe some scientists just remain quiet or didn't focus on proving that sugars are healthy and not an issue at all. And then you also have these big sugar industry executives that are spending money for pro-industry research. So one CEO spent millions trying to find anything wrong with artificial sweeteners. And so you had studies that were giving rats the equivalent of 60 cans of soda a day for years in order to find any sort of negative effect. As soon as a negative effect arises, then we are going to push that article onto just the general population through the media and show that, hey, look, these artificial sweeteners are causing cancer. And say, oh, yeah, and a rat who consumed more soda than a regular human would in 3 years. But I guess, yeah, technically it does have detrimental health effects. But again, that's just overconsumption, not necessarily if we just consumed a normal amount of that artificial sweetener. And so you do have corruption, right? So Coca-Cola admitted to spending $2.1 million in 2015 for pro-industry research to 115 health professionals. 58% of those health professionals were registered dietitians who are supposed to be the experts whenever it comes to food and nutrition. 20% was spent on individuals who worked in academia, so your professors who tell you whether or not sugar or fat is healthy and kind of steers the boat on how you look at things and the questions that you develop, as well as the professors who are conducting all the research proving that, hey, Gatorade is very, very, very beneficial for athletic performance. And also, it has no negative effect on individuals who consume it all the time for just like a juice alternative, and they don't do anything ever. That's not contributing to the increased weight gain. It's actually the fact that they're not performing any physical activity. That's the issue, not the overconsumption of the sugars from Gatorade. So, yes, although public health officials like to point out that interventions that rely on individual human behavior change is going to be less effective than other interventions, you can also make the argument that there are enough experts that are conflicting or providing conflicting results that there shouldn't be an intervention that is established for the general population, right? To some individuals, what they might hear is that you have some accomplished scientist who lacks confidence in your ability or our ability as a population to control our urges. So we're just wild beasts compared to their superior minds, and they lack the respect of our freedom, our right to disagree, which is very important because science is always evolving, right? So a lot of good examples where experts were wrong. For the longest time, you probably heard whenever you are done running or doing a gasser workout or running suicides on the court, that you need to rest with your hands on top of your head, remaining upright the whole time. Turns out that's been wrong. You actually want to recover with where you are bent over, hands on your knees, and expanding that thoracic cavity. We also see that football players or football coaches didn't want to lift weight or didn't want their players to lift weights because it would make them bulky and slow. And then Nebraska started dominating everyone when someone actually had the football players start lifting. And then in the 90s, Penn State, who's considered like the Harvard of the kinesiology field, said that the best method for sport performance training would be to utilize machines instead of free weights. And then they got their butts handed to them by a bunch of subpar one, well, not one double A, but your Akrons of the world in, say, football or volleyball. We used to, at one point, recommend consuming trans fats. Trans fats were healthy. You right now, or in, well, not anymore, but in recent years, you had Dr. Tim Noakes, who they were trying to remove his medical license because he gave advice that was contrary to the typical big pro-industry sugar advice that's been established for the past 40 years, where he actually recommended consuming more fats and less carbs over Twitter. And as a result, they spent 4 years trying to remove his medical license. But now we're just supposed to support restrictions that these experts are putting in place, when just as many experts are providing counterpoints to why we shouldn't have restrictions. And so the point would be that science should inform personal choice, but not replace it, right? If science is used to justify restricting choice, then it stops being science and becomes ideology instead. And we have to have the freedom to disagree, because we know science is constantly evolving, and as we get newer and better information, we are going to have to adjust what our understanding is. And this takes time. So to wrap everything up, this side of the argument may point out that it wasn't government regulations that got people to stop smoking. They quit because of the awareness that smoking was causing lung cancer, and they didn't want to kill themselves anymore. And people often overestimate how quickly a population will just switch what they've known to be true for 40 years. So it takes time to actually see or to convince people that what they've been doing is actually unhealthy and they should stop doing it. So if you grew up back in the 50s and for the first 30, 40 years of your life, all of your doctors smoked. Every day you had commercials that were like 4 out of 5 doctors smoke Camels. It would take decades, most likely, for most people to actually consider that smoking causes lung cancer and is unhealthy. Because for the first 30 years, you told them not only was it safe, it was actually beneficial for you. And that's what we're seeing right now with sugar. For the past 40 years, we've been told fat is bad, sugar is good. And when you tell someone that it's not their fatty foods that are leading to obesity and their, say, diabetes or being pre-diabetic, there's initial skepticism, like there should be. Because for the past 40 years, the government, commercials, all these heart-healthy promotion badges or stickers that we put on all our foods show that sugars are good. It's fats that are bad. And so when you actually consider why people stopped smoking, it wasn't because of the increased taxes or the not being able to smoke indoors at restaurants. It was simply the time it took to educate the population that yes, we actually do see uh, a significant correlation between lung cancer and smoking cigarettes. And so you don't need restrictions, you just need the general population to become more aware that it is that the overconsumption of food is what is causing uh, your chronic diseases to continue to increase, not uh, the fact that we should place restrictions on foods whenever there's still debate out there.